Hi, everyone. Today we're here to honor UBC Professor Emeritus Tony Pitcher. I am both Tony's colleague and his wife. So rather than focus on his professional achievements, which you can read about online, I would like to introduce the session by telling you a bit more about Tony the person and what inspired him in his life and visionary career. Yeah, so you've seen this is the introduction to the symposium, and then the next slide is the Tony that I know, and that's the person that we're here to celebrate today. So Tony grew up in Banbury, a small town outside of Oxford. His father, Ernst, was a carpenter who dreamed that his son would become a professor. So he invented stories about a fictitious Professor Potnot, which he read to young Tony. Tony's mother, Winifred, had tuberculosis and was hospitalized for an extended period of Tony's youth. Both inspired Tony to be diligent in his studies and to want to be a medical doctor. But he fainted at the first sign of blood in his biology class, so instead he chose fisheries and created his legacy. So while Tony did not build with his hands like his father, he built ideas and communities with his imagination and vision. He has a gift of seeing that which is not visible, novel ideas in scientific research, and unrealized potential in his protégés and academic community. Tony co-authored the seminal book in fisheries ecology, founded 2 leading journals, and 2 book series in fisheries. He was the founding director of the Fishery Center, the predecessor of the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries, and got the funding for this building, in which we now honor him. If you attended the 2 earlier sessions today on Tony's scientific career and legacy, you got a hint of the breadth and depth of his intellectual insight and passionate commitment to make the world around him, both the natural and social, a better place. But in the process of making ideas and others visible, he made himself at times invisible. He devoted himself to the scientific community as an author, editor, director, and supervisor, but lacked the singular drive in his research. He gravitated to areas where he saw something missing, contributed a piece of himself, and then moved on to another area that stimulated him. So today, we are here to make visible and prominent Tony's contributions to the field of fish and fisheries, and to the careers and lives of those who studied and collaborated with him. This is our collective gift to you, Tony, to let you know that you are valued and that your scientific legacy and personal legacy are valuable for all the world to see. So that's an introduction to Tony, and now we have Professor Paul Hart, who's the first speaker in this session. Professor Emeritus Paul Hart from the University of Leicester. Paul's a longtime collaborator of Tony's from the United Kingdom. He's a co-author with Tony of the seminal textbook Fisheries Ecology and co-editor of the leading fisheries journal Fish and Fisheries. Paul and Tony, like Gilbert and Sullivan, have complementary personalities and research interests, which is what makes them such an effective scientific duo. Paul was also the best man at our wedding. So this is a picture of Paul and Tony celebrating their 70th birthdays at a symposium in Bangor. So turning it over to you, Paul.
Okay, so thanks very much for the introduction. And I just want to share a few experiences that I have had with Tony with you. And I thought I'd start in this way. I discovered by accident today that today is the 250th anniversary of the birth of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, an English poet. And he collaborated extensively with another English poet, William Wordsworth. And Coleridge wrote a poem to Wordsworth, which starts with these words, "Friend of the wise and teacher of the good." And I thought this was quite a nice way to introduce my reminiscences of Tony. I can't advance the flipping thing. Yeah. So when and where did we meet? We met in 1969 at the 4th British Course Fish Conference, which was held in Liverpool at the Zoology Department, where I did my first degree and where I was registered for a PhD. And at the time, both of us were doing a PhDs. Me with Jack Jones, who was the runner of the coarse fish conferences. I should explain perhaps that coarse fish means non-salmonids and is a term used in Britain to signify all these non-salmonid fish. I was doing a PhD on fish in the River Nene in Northamptonshire. Tony was doing a study of minnows in the Seacourt stream, which is a tributary of the Thames. And we got on well together and we kept in touch. And I was based at the time in Oundle in Northamptonshire, which is the east of England. And Tony, of course, was at Oxford. And these two places are only about an hour's drive apart. So we traveled over to meet each other quite a bit. And it was a great benefit to me to have this interaction because I was very isolated academically. And Tony came and visited me quite often, and we did field work together. And one of the instruments that we both used was the Panjet syringe, which was a way of injecting dye into a fish without using a needle. And this instrument was invented originally for dentistry, but we hijacked it for our work. And the result of working with this led to our first paper, Field Trials of Fish Marking, which I think was certainly my first paper, and I do think that it's possibly also Tony's first paper. And we also published 2 other papers relating to my PhD work as a result of this. Anyway. And as you've just heard, later on, when Tony had moved to Coleraine and I moved to Edinburgh to work on the Continuous Plankton Recorder Survey, we still kept in touch. And by the time that we got round to it, Tony had moved to Bangor, and I had come back from where I'd been in Sweden for 3 years. And we started work on fisheries ecology, which we jointly wrote and which was published in 1982. It's been fairly successful, and I think it's led the way in combining fish ecology with fisheries ecology. Then over the years, I've joined Tony in editing books resulting mainly from conferences, The Impact of Species Changes on African Lakes, Reinventing Fisheries Management, which you've heard about already in the previous session, and the book on seamounts, which resulted from a conference in the Azores. And then, of course, the journals. I have to mention here also 2 people who I think were instrumental in helping Tony set up reviews in fish biology and fisheries. The first was Nigel Balmforth, who worked for Chapman and Hall, who published the journal. And the second was Chuck Hollingworth, who was Tony's friend and colleague at Bangor, who was a copy editor and worked as the first managing editor of the journal. And these 2 set up the journal, which started in 1991. And at first, Tony was the only editor. He asked me to join him as co-editor in 1997, which I was very happy to do. And we continued until 1999, when Chapman and Hall was taken over by Kluwer, the Dutch company. We didn't like the way they operated, so we decided to abandon the journal, which still exists, of course. And by this time, Nigel had moved to Blackwell's in Oxford, and he helped us set up a new journal, Fish and Fisheries, which of course you now know about because it's been around since 2000 and is in its 22nd year. Tony and I are no longer involved in editing it, but the editing work has been taken over now by 4 new people. Well, Gary Carvalho was doing it with us already, but 3 other people have joined it recently, 2 women, and there are now 2 men doing it. And this journal, I think, has been very important in doing interdisciplinary or publishing interdisciplinary papers, which have had a reasonable impact. We've also did a bit of joint teaching. The man in the middle here is Tarcisio Antezana, a Chilean who invited us to teach a course on behavioral ecology in the early 90s, before Tony had moved to UBC. And this is us at Dichato, which is the marine station of the University of Concepcion in Chile, where we taught a selection of students from a wide range of South American countries. This was an interesting experience. And I think one of the main things that has really inspired our collaboration and friendship has been the fact that we have very parallel interests in research. So when Tony started his research career after his PhD, he worked essentially on schooling of fish and the effects of schooling on foraging and on behavior. And he published many very important papers in this area. But in 1993, when he left Imperial College London and moved to UBC to direct the Fisheries Centre, he essentially abandoned the behaviour work and focused on fisheries, which you've heard about a great deal in the previous session. And of course, we both share an interest in this area, modelling, management systems, and the ecology lying behind exploitation of fish. So I think this has given us the opportunity always to have interesting conversations. I always find it very stimulating to discuss with Tony and to exchange ideas. And we hit it off very well. And I have good memories of standing on the banks of the River Nene, talking about all sorts of things relating to fisheries and how things might develop in the future. And finally, so I would just like to thank you, Tony, for a lifetime, 53 years now, of friendship, collaboration, and inspiration. Thank you very much.
Excuse me. The next speaker, I think, doesn't need an introduction because there's been a whole book written about him, The Ocean's Whistleblower, The Remarkable Life and Work of Daniel Pauly. And I think there's also a documentary that's being filmed right now. But just to say a few words that you might not know about, that as the director of the Fisheries Centre, Tony recruited Daniel when he was still working at ICLARM to come to UBC. And at the time, the interview committee in zoology were really quite unsure about hiring this tropical fishery scientist because he hadn't published in Nature or Science yet. So Tony argued for his merit, and they flew him to Vancouver, and apparently Daniel walked right off the plane into his interview and wowed the committee. So then he was hired as a full professor, and the rest is history, and Daniel will tell you the rest.
The formal papers and achievements have been presented, so I would present it my personal views. And my first interaction with you, Tony, is actually a paper that was part of your thesis, I think, about seasonal growth. And seasonal growth of fish is neglected, and you invented a nifty little equation that needed a little bit of adding, and it is used now very, very widely. There are different versions of it, but you are at the origin of this. And I was aware of the work on fish schooling and versus shoaling, but I never worked on these things. Then we had various correspondence about the analysis of length frequency data. And this correspondence was not always friendly, and we argued about virtual population analysis and so on. And I mentioned this because Tony then, in spite of our correspondence, invited me to become a member of the advisory board of the Fisheries Centre that was created. And I was at the time in the Philippines, and I was visiting my in-laws I think it was in winter. I came then from California here, and then we had a crisis where I worked at ICLARM in the Philippines, and we decided that I should apply for a position that had been open. And Tony fought for this because, indeed, My first paper in Nature was a year later, and was a weird character that I was publishing, but it was mainly topical stuff. And we had started fish-based, but it was not really the thing that it is now. And Tony fought for me, and such that I was hired as a full professor. Now, I didn't say this to other people, but at the time I was a bit anxious because I was hired as a full professor with tenure on the base also of a, I don't know if it was formal or informal, that minorities should be hired at a level higher. And it has been a load on my shoulders for many years, because this is like affirmative action. Do you perform at the level that you have been hired? And I was able to, because the Fisheries Center turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful place. But before I came in '94, in September, we spent, I think it was in '94, just after the election in South Africa, which abolished apartheid, we spent 1 or 2 weeks in a hut in Cape Town, reviewing about 100 fisheries application for grants that had to be modified or evaluated on the basis of non-racial criteria, because South Africa had just discovered that it's not a country that with only white people, and then the selection of project we funded was to be modified with other criteria, and there was an American colleague, and Tony and I, and it was wonderful how we worked together in this setup. We couldn't get out. The man from the agency brought us food, and we worked on 100 projects and evaluated them along criteria of equity. That was a completely new thing in South Africa, and we agreed on everything. That was wonderful. Then I came to the Fisheries Center, and I brought with me EcoPath, which had been invented by a colleague in Hawaii, but had been kind of improved by myself and Willy Christensen. And Tony was hesitant at first, but then he adopted it, and it became the thing that you have heard from Cam and other people, and Divya, the thing that united for 5 years about the Fisheries Center. All of us work on it, and it became really the world center of ecosystem modeling in the marine realm. It was astounding, because normally you have silos in an institute, and people work on their own thing. And the center, for about 5 years, worked on different aspects of the same thing, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful, and this is Tony. 2 journals, you have heard, were founded by Tony. Now, they were extremely successful, and the question is why? I think it's because they combined the specific with the general, and we had discussion about that. There are journals, like the Journal of Fish Biology, that have only specific stuff, and there are journals that are only general. And the criteria that Tony either implicitly or explicitly applied for papers is that the specific should allow you to view the general, and that is, I think, the reason for the success of these 2 journals. Most Brits that have come, and most immigrants that come to Canada, they are First Nation people call them settlers. My ancestors, at least my father's side, did not come as settlers, but you understand how they came, my ancestors, right? They didn't come as settlers. Anyway, most people come as settlers, and they actually don't know and don't understand what First Nation issues are. This is long before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had forced Canadians to see what they had done. And Tony knew what was happening, knew what First Nation are and should be, and very early he involved the Fisheries Center and its staff and its faculty with the Aboriginal Fisheries Commission, which doesn't exist really anymore, but we had very early, very good relationship with First Nation fisheries problem, and that blossomed there very early. So I'm really happy to have been involved in this. And in discussion, I found out that Tony also was involved in the civil rights movement in the US, as he went down south to be beaten up by police and stuff. And does Tony, even though he started as Brit, and you know what they are, understand issues of racism? And it turns out that that these issues are shaping our world now. It shouldn't be like this. We should have overcome them, but they are now becoming in the forefront of politics in lots of countries. And Tony has understood that. And that's why I'm here. That's why Rashid is here. So thank you very much.
Then I'll introduce the next speaker, which is April White. And so April's a Haida artist and geologist. And there'll be a slide, maybe I'll just wait a sec for it. But Tony first met April when he served on the Haida Marine Advisory Committee. And in addition to being an artist and a geologist, April runs a bed and breakfast in Old Masset, where Tony stayed. Sorry, yeah. And so quickly, Tony was attracted to her artwork displayed in the B&B, but also to her food and charm. And so when we were thinking of an artist to collaborate with for the Herring People Art Space Initiative, and he quickly thought of April and contacted her. And from that grew a very close collaboration and friendship that continues today. So I'm very proud and honored to invite April to come speak in this session.
How, Mimi? I guess we could use the slides, but I came here prepared, but very unprepared, in the sense that my collaboration is a little bit different than most, because he came to me as an artist and wanted art to help facilitate their research, the research he and Mimi and Simon were working on. So I got introduced to them all. I very, very quickly said yes to collaborating because of my background. I am Haida. I was born on Haida Gwaii. In Udikion SGaana Jaad, my Haida name is April White. Translates to killer whale woman. But I made a different decision than Tony after I graduated. I started creating artwork pretty well right after university. I graduated as a geologist and was working in the field because I loved field work, and I liked being out instead of being in a lab somewhere. And it really took over my life. So I went the rock star route rather than the academic route. So here I am. It feels like coming full circle, because I got to give science a voice with art. And I find that very exciting, because going beyond the academic journals, which are very important, but it brings the artwork out to the general public. And it's, I think, extremely important thing. And I'm so glad that they asked me to collaborate, because the art has gone on to speak to, I don't know how many volumes of people. And a lot of scientists coincidentally buy my work because they really get what I'm doing. And to create this work, in working with Tony, I wanted to know more about what he was doing. It happened to be about herring, which I know a lot about. So if you've guys seen the art up in the Hakai node, it now has signage, so it explains my connection to herring. So 6 of the pieces, that's what it's about, is explaining my connection to herring. But I chose the beings through Henry, or I just mentioned my uncle's name, but through Tony's ecosystem modeling. So I made those choices to represent not just the under the water, but animals that are dependent on herring. So it really represents undersea, realm, land, and sky. So I think that, and in addition to all of this, it was about using ethics and human values in terms of the commercial fishery. And doing that was easy because that's the way I've lived my life, is with these 6 Haida values. And I really like to say that Tony really embodies all of these values. And that's why the friendship has continued for 10 years. So, and I think in the end, it will just come down to the one, which is respect. And I feel that in this room, he is very respected. He is respected by me. And I just like to say, Hawa Tony, Dunglas Kilagan, Hawa. These are flashcards that were used in the research. All of the 6, I always call it the 6 of them, the 3, and 3 of them are the 3 R's you've got to learn growing up. Responsibility, reciprocity, and of course, respect. And that's for all living things, not just other human beings. There's the model that spun the artwork. So these all represent the different realms. They all make sense in my mind anyway. And I chose to do both a man and a woman because we are the stewards of this world and we're not doing a great job right now. So we got to step it up.
I was told firmly that I'm not to go on too long, which is my bad habit. So.
Yeah, okay. So then this is just some photos of Tony. So can you see it?
That's me at a very early age, before the fish, before I invented fish.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a good looking lad. And yeah, there was a dilemma in my early teens where I started a rock group and it did rather well. We won a competition and played in, of all places, the Albert Hall, which is well known in Britain as being a premier place to go. In memory of it's in memory of the husband of Queen Victoria, the first husband. Well, her only husband. Yeah. So there I was, playing my guitar, and then at the end of this competition, we won. I couldn't believe it. So it was very good for the girls. If you I guess I shouldn't mention that with my wife here. You know, which areas of the girls you got to sign, which was nice. But I made a mistake, and I opted for the academic career, which would have been, which I think was really crazy. But there we are. Now, this is me catching my first saith in the outfall just outside Aberdeen. And the saith like mucky stuff, so they accumulate in the outfall. So we caught some of them and then trained them to go in a little apparatus you'll see in a moment. Oh, there's an interregnum with a missing bit here. We were working with some African people in Lake Kariba, and one of them went on to do a PhD in UBC. And at that time, the huts looked like that. It was like a post-war mess. But we loved it. You could find a room to yourself, and you could do what you wanted. So nobody came and pestered you like they do these days. And then the huts were demolished. There they are being demolished. And then we got the money for this building, which you're sitting in at the moment. I'm not sure it was that. The old huts were really very, very nice, very good atmosphere. But I suppose you're better with a better building, right? No, I'm not sure about that. These are some of the books that we issued pretty early on. And one journal was very successful and still is, Fish and Fisheries. And that soon rose to the top of the list of the publication list. There's an early group of students, and the model that our friendly artist has adopted. I can't remember what that one is. Where are we going next? I don't know. I wish I did. Daniel knows where he's going, and I'm bound to find him.
I think there's one last thing of this session, and that's a gift from April White and the UBC Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. Look like they're leaping right off the page.